The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Reports out of Iraq say relative calm has returned to most cities today as fighters loyal to Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr have obeyed his call to stay off the streets. More than 450 people were reportedly killed since Iraqi forces launched an offensive against Sadr's Mahdi army late last month. President Bush hailed the crackdown as proof of U.S. success in shoring up the Iraqi military to fight on its own. But reports on the ground indicate the U.S. military still led most of the attacks. My first guest today has spent extensive time covering the U.S. occupation of Iraq. Nir Rosen has just returned from 3 months in Iraq, his latest since moving to Baghdad to cover the U.S. invasion in 2003. Nir has written for publications including The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Time, and Harper's. His latest dispatch from Iraq, The Myth of the Surge, appeared in Rolling Stone magazine last month. He's author of the book In the Belly of the Green Bird, The Triumph of the Martyrs in Iraq, which comes out this month in a second edition. Nir Rosen joins us in our studio. Welcome.
Thank you.
The myth of the surge. Why is it a myth?
Well, it's been propagated by the right and accepted by the left in the U.S. that the surge, which is really an escalation of troops, the surge is a euphemism, the escalation of troops by 30,000 soldiers somehow brought peace to Iraq. And this is just an absolute lie. Violence has subsided somewhat in Baghdad. That's true, but it's not the result of the increase in American troops directly. It's the result of a few other factors. First of all, the violence in Iraq was always goal-oriented. It was logical. Remove Sunnis from Shia areas, remove Shias from Sunni areas. That's been virtually completed. There are almost no Sunnis left in Baghdad, a few pockets, and that's it. And likewise, Shias in Sunni areas have been removed, and militias and warlords have consolidated their control over various fiefdoms in Baghdad and elsewhere. So that's one reason, that there's less people to kill. The violence is down because you have less people to kill. It wasn't going to last forever. Although it's still extremely violent in Iraq, and when I was there, quite a few times there were dead bodies in front of my house. A guy shot in the head in front of my house. So it's not exactly a peaceful place. And then there are two other factors for why the violence went down. What we can call the Sunni and Shia ceasefire. The Mahdi army, Muqtada al-Sadr's militia, basically imposed a freeze, which has been mistranslated as a ceasefire, in late August 2007. And this coincided exactly with a dramatic decrease in violence, which shows just how responsible they were for much of the violence. And the reason why they imposed a ceasefire is because they realized that they were basically the main target for the increase in American troops. The Americans were going to go after them, so you might as well declare a freeze. They said they were going to reform themselves. They had got a bad reputation because they were implicated in sectarian killings. Some of their guys were out of control. So they're going to lie low and wait the Americans out. Likewise, the Sunnis imposed a ceasefire in a way. You had Sunni militias who were fighting the occupation. They were fighting al-Qaeda because while al-Qaeda had initially come to many Sunni areas to protect them from the Americans and the Shias, they soon got out of control, and even Sunnis were feeling like they were living under a reign of terror by these radicals. They were undermining traditional Sunni authorities. They were disrupting smuggling routes. They were killing Sunnis as well. So Sunnis were fighting the Americans, they were fighting al-Qaeda, and they were fighting the Shia militias. And they were really losing on every front. They had not succeeded in overthrowing the American occupation and seizing power in Iraq. They had been removed from Baghdad. The majority of the refugees outside of Iraq were Sunni. So they had lost. And beginning in 2006, you saw them being much more introspective resistance leaders in Baghdad and Syria and Jordan. We've lost. What do we do now? And they first went after al-Qaeda in many areas with the backing of the Americans. This is a great deal for them. And they lost, and here they are. Now the Americans are off of their back. And they now control territory. They're called the awakening groups in many cases, but the Americans have called them various euphemisms: Sons of Iraq, Concerned Local Citizens, Critical Infrastructure Security, Iraqi Security Volunteers, basically former members of the resistance, what the Americans call insurgents, who have decided temporarily for a hudna or a ceasefire with the Americans to focus on their real enemy, the Iranians. And when they say Iranians, they mean all the Shias. When you talk to them, they say there are two occupations of Iraq, the American occupation and the Iranian occupation. To them, all Shias are basically Iranian fifth columnists, and they view the Iraqi government, to the extent that it exists, the various Shia militias, as Iranians. So we're going to fight them first because the Americans are going to leave eventually. So you have this the Shia and Sunni ceasefire, and the decline in people to kill, the consolidation of control that we saw with various warlords and militiamen throughout Baghdad. Each neighborhood is walled off. You have a warlord or a militiaman in charge of it, which actually makes things easier as a journalist, because there's a guy you can go to get a security guarantee. It also makes things easier for aid organizations like the Red Cross. They can now function as they do in Somalia, because Iraq has really become Somalia. Different warlords controlling different areas. Talk of the government is just absurd. There is no government in Iraq. It's a collection of different militias who, as we see, even fight among themselves. And we see in the recent Shia on Shia fighting, it's not the government against the Mahdi army. It's one Shia militia, the Badr organization that belongs to the Iraqi Islamic Supreme Council. Supreme Islamic Iraqi Council, it has different names, and Dawah. So basically the pro-American Shia militias, backed by the Americans, fighting the largest Shia movement in Iraq, the Sadrist movement, for control of turf, over resources, and of course over the control of the population in the upcoming elections, which may or may not happen. And in fact, perhaps we can see it as a positive development in a way, because this basically means the end of the Sunni-Shia civil war in Iraq. There's no more Shia bloc that can fight the Sunnis. In 2006, 2007, you saw Badr and the Mahdi army collaborating to expel and kill Sunnis in Baghdad. Now that's over. So now we might see cross-sectarian alliances between Sunni militias and the Mahdi army fighting the pro-American Shia militias like Badr or like Dawah.
What about the money the U.S. putting into, well, groups like the so-called, well, one of its names, the Awakening?
Well, the Americans like to think that the reason why the Sunni militiamen, the Sunni resistance, have stopped fighting them is because they're paying them. Because for the American point of view, it was always about money. They never understood the importance of ideology or of occupation or of resistance. So to them, people joined the resistance because they needed a job, and the resistance paid you, which is just absolutely ridiculous. I met with many of these people. Nobody joined the resistance for money. They joined because they believed there was an occupation that was threatening their lives or their country or their religion, or they didn't like the way the new government looked. So they joined the resistance to fight the American occupation, not for money. And now they joined these awakening groups, again, not for money, but because they have other interest. We're not going to fight the Americans now, we're going to fight the Iranians. Let's get the Americans off of our back. In a way, the Sunnis actually bought the Americans, because now they control territory. The same militiamen who were killing Shias, who were blowing up Americans just a few months ago, who were on the run, now control territory inside Baghdad and elsewhere, and it's become safe for Sunnis to go to those areas. Not only Sunnis from those areas, but even Sunnis who fled Shia militias in other places can now go there. So you have safe Sunni territories. From there, different Sunni groups can join, they can establish a political movement, which they're trying to do, and eventually try to retake Baghdad or at least refight the civil war.
We're talking to Nir Rosen. He is just back from Baghdad. What about what happened in Basra? A major defeat for Maliki. In fact, some rumors of him being replaced.
Well, there have been rumors of him being replaced for a while. You had a period where Democratic senators were pushing for his replacement. I don't think he's going to be replaced because there's no replacement, but that doesn't really matter, because whoever's in charge inside the green zone makes no difference. People in the green zone have never had an impact outside of the green zone. Maliki doesn't have his own militia anyway, so he's not exactly a very powerful individual, which is why he was chosen. And the Americans deliberately engineered the position of the Prime Minister of Iraq to be very weak. He has been discredited a little bit from this because he said that the Mahdi army is worse than Al-Qaeda, we're never going to negotiate, we're going to fight to the end. Then Muqtada Sadr tells his people to back off, suddenly everything's okay again. And the fighting is over. So he comes across as a bit of a charlatan. He also came across, or at least the idea of Iraqi security forces was proven to be also sort of a joke, because many of them defected. It's well known that the Iraqi police and national police are infiltrated or dominated by Mahdi army supporters. But much of the Iraqi army is too. So you saw the units of the Iraqi army who were fighting the Mahdi army were recruited in the south, and many of them were loyal to the Supreme Council and to Badr. So nobody's loyal to the Iraqi state here. But what we also saw was that were it not for the American military, the Iraqi security forces would have lost completely. I mean, the Americans were their armor, the Americans were their air force, and if it wasn't for that, then the Mahdi army would have had no reason to call off its fighters.
We're talking to Nir Rosen. We'll be back with him in a minute. His book that's coming out next month, The Triumph of the Martyrs, A Reporter's Journey into Occupied Iraq, his latest piece in Rolling Stone, The Myth of the Surge. Stay with us.